Iran obviously knows the importance of this inflation coming down, and this is a real weapon and probably their most valuable weapon.
The number of licensed appraisers really dropped off a cliff from 30,000 down to less than 10,000 licensed appraisers in the country today. The reality is the consumer's paying more than the $575 in most cases, and yet the appraiser is not, collecting the $575 or more.
AMCs are kind of stepping in and saying, there's really not a pathway for a small firm or a large firm to bring trainees in. Episode 91 of the award-winning Market Moves with Mark and Jeff, two uninteresting guys talking about interesting times. Jeff, you are back in the States. Welcome back. We have some fun topics here, talking about the kind of extreme differences in commercial real estate, office and industrial. We're talking about inflation. Everyone is talking about inflation, so will we. We are talking about the Appraisal Foundation's appraiser workforce paper that they put out in response to a President Trump executive order, and also some insight into the effect on the housing, the institutional housing ban that the president has put forward, and its impact on developers. So we've got a lot to talk about today that is covering a lot of topics in and around real estate. The interesting times holding solid here.
Well, that's one safe bet, is that there will be interesting times to talk about. It's probably equally safe that we'll continue to be uninteresting guys talking about them, Mark. But I've been back in the country for less than 12 hours, and you've already got a full slate for me to take on. So I'm definitely looking forward to it.
No rest for the weary, Jeff. Are you advising we all go to Japan?
Yeah, I think I probably am. Yeah, it's been kind of a whirlwind getting back. I think my wife had calculated we've been awake for close to 30 hours in traveling, accepting whatever you could manage to sleep on the plane and getting back. But so much of what we're talking about is obviously U.S. economy, markets, and that sort of thing. It's really interesting to be immersed in Japan over there. I didn't do a whole lot of market research there. Maybe I should have, but great experience, kind of learning and getting to know a bit of the culture, and it's kind of a rude awakening to come through TSA after this such a focus on service and taking care of people, and we got this TSA line going through customs in a layover, and it wasn't real service oriented. I guess we'll just leave it at that. But it's great to be back and talking about it again. Behind the scenes peak, we tried to record something while I was sitting in the lobby at a hotel before the day of travel, and between internet and terrible setup, it just didn't make sense. So I'm definitely glad to be back in studio, so to speak.
I am so deeply wrapped up into trying to service a clients in the appraisal side. It's what we do every day, and we work really, really hard at it and try to keep a smiling face through it all. But the amount of effort we put into that versus the amount of berating from frustrated people that, despite our efforts and despite what I think is overall very good service. And then you go to the TSA, or in my world, youth sports, in family life, like how little people need to serve or care to serve their customers, and it just works. It's such an interesting dichotomy. I don't know. I get frustrated at times. Like, goodness gracious, we have to work so hard to serve people well here, and it can be thankless at times.
Boy, it really is. It reminds me of a Jeff Bezos quote, where I don't get it exactly right, but he describes the unsatisfied nature of the customers as being like delightfully unsatisfied or something, viewing it as an opportunity to rise to the challenge to delight people as often as possible. And you're going to have unhappy people for sure, but and in our world, you can do 99 appraisals, great service, great reports. It's the one where something comes up where not all of it is even your fault, that is kind of the perceived dropping of the ball and the problem that gets perpetuated in somebody's mind. And it's a high standard, but I think it's a high standard in any service-oriented space. And with TSA, I mean, nobody cares about feedback, for them, I don't think. But in a service that you're choosing to engage with, you have to have the mentality that I'm going to do better than you expect, and aim to do that every time.
Well, I think my co-host is calling me to thank our dear customers for making us better through that, which I think is the right way to do it, and it certainly has made us better. But man, it's we work hard at this, and it's just so different. The medical community, you go to doctors' offices, it's like there is no effort in the way that we do in the appraisal space. Anyway, good stuff. I guess that was off script, Jeff. I guess I'm feeling that lately these days, but yeah, very good. Well, welcome in. I half expected you in a kimono this morning. That wouldn't have been, I don't know, on brand with market moves, but I do appreciate you dragging your family along in the credit creation theory analysis road trip that you went on there.
Yes, so my daughters bought kimonos while there, and my son bought kind of I forget what the men's version of that is. I did not, so I'm sorry to disappoint. It would have been off brand to have actually done something interesting, so I didn't want to ruin that for us, Mark. But fun to see them there. I actually got some fun pictures of them wearing some stuff, some native or local dress and that sort of thing. But here we are, ready to dive in, and happy to be doing it.
Yeah, welcome back. Well, our first topic here is Tale of Two Cities. I think this is the right order, Jeff. Yeah, no, let's talk about inflation first. I see that we've got that as a first slide, and that's a quick hit here. So excuse the show agenda adjustment here on the fly, but we did get an inflation print this week, 4.2%. Headlines are hair on fire. 4.2% sucks. It's not a good number. This is the second time over 4%. I did hear some predictions. I don't know what the settled prediction was, but I had heard some predictions that inflation might reach the upper fours at this print. Important to note on the slide that we're showing here, first, a very sharp increase in inflation, but it is separating out overall inflation, CPI, at 4.2, but core CPI, that I believe removes energy, among a few other things, at 2.9%. So this would point out that inflation is largely related to the conflict in the Middle East. It's how I read it, Jeff. Do you read it any other way?
No, that's right. And I think the good news in this is simply that it is energy related, kind of directly and specifically. The core strips out the energy and I believe food prices, which are historically pretty volatile. And some make the argument that, well, yeah, but people are still paying at the pump and paying at the grocery store as much as anything else that they spend on. But I think the good news is just that whenever there's a resolution and the energy, price is addressed, adjusted, whatever, I think the other underlying fundamentals are not, putting a lot of upward pressure on interest rates or at least on inflation. And so, I think we can return to closer to target in, fairly short order. That's not going to happen overnight. And the problem, as I've been tracking, headlines and developments in the Middle East, even this week, is we're not, as close to a resolution as we'd like to be. There's been some attacks back and forth between Israel, Iran, U.S. It hasn't, exploded necessarily as far as, like all-out conflict, but there's definitely back and forth, going on there. So, yeah, we've been saying this for a long time. I mean, the sooner that is resolved, the better for everything as far as the economy and interest rates. But I'm reading this as saying, hey, once the energy is addressed, I think that we're back on heading towards where the Fed wants to be. It's going to be hard for them to make a cut. I saw an article that basically was ruling that out for any real likelihood of a cut in their later this month June meeting. So I think that's probably a reasonable expectation.
Yeah, Jeff, during the week in our show thread where we share topics that we're seeing and discuss potential things to discuss on the podcast, one of those headlines was bondholders are waiting to see if Warsh has the chutzpah to fight inflation, right? And my read will be that he says inflation, this sort of rise in inflation is pretty transitory. There isn't a need to, in fact, it would be the wrong move to fight it. Let's wait for it to come down and see where a settled market is, not this one that's real charged up. So that would be an expectation that a conflict in the Middle East would resolve. It is interesting. The administration certainly puts out that they think the conflict could be resolved soon. I get the feeling from their words, which just may intentionally be misleading, but I get the feeling that they think they could end it very quickly at any moment that they choose. They're just trying to get a right deal in place, whatever. But Iran obviously knows the importance of this inflation coming down, and this is a real weapon, and probably their most valuable weapon is creating economic problem for Trump here in the U.S. And so, that's really the battle is, Trump is out there saying, I can wait as long as I need to. Iran, that's not a tool for you. And Iran says, I'm not so sure about that. Right. So that's the real game of cat and mouse. So, my expectation is that we see a meaningful drop in interest rates before the end of the year. A lot has to happen to set up that. But I think the Warsh and I think the administration generally think that rates should be lower and they should stabilize at a lower rate and just sort of leave them alone and let's stop talking about it. The market certainly needs that. From all, we're going to talk about the office market here in a little bit, and rates are playing an enormous impact on the office market around the country, and in certain markets more than others. And it's just we talk about rates as it relates to residential and housing affordability and all this, but obviously this stuff is impacting so much more than that. And I think that's what those that are in favor of meaningful interest rate drops are looking at is we just need to fuel the economy with some drops here.
No doubt. I mean, and I think the stage was set prior to the Iran conflict, for that to be the case, and then this, it just has unintended consequences, or maybe they were known or anticipated. For whatever reason, the administration felt like it was worth going in there. My hope is that this doesn't turn into a long drawn out thing, and this transitory effect, comes back to bite those, referring to it, which, is what happened in, COVID era with Jerome Powell, 5-6 years ago. So, I mean, for a lot of reasons, we're continuing to hope for a resolution there, but, all we can do is, kind of analyze the game on the field as it stands and hope that it's headed the right direction.
Man, yeah. That's all we can do. And the housing market, I think, is still stalled. And there's just all these little things. We'll be talking a lot about this later on the podcast. But I mean, there's just so many things that are negative for residential real estate. In each by itself may not be hugely negative, but when you add them all up, it's just on top of the already negative environment. It's made it very difficult for real estate professionals. From foreclosure to build to rent stagnation and on and on. It's created a lot of problems here. Well, let's jump to Chicagoland and look at a tweet that really caught our eye this week from Nightingale Associates, at least the Twitter account Nightingale Associates, talking about some 15 or more downtown office transactions that have were bought between 2006, 2005, and 2018, and then have recently resold. It is an absolute bloodbath. We're 401 South State Street, just to read the top line that's presented for those that aren't watching, was bought for $68.1 million in 2016. Recently sold for $4.2 million. 300 West Adams bought for $51 million in 2012, just sold for $4 million. So this is just a couple of examples. 31 South, 311 South Wacker, which I think I've spent a lot of time near in Appraisal Institute service. It was bought for $302 million in 2014, just sold for $45 million. So these are just a couple of examples, but it's 94% drop, 92% drop, 90% drop, 87. I mean, these are terror. I mean, this is like the savings and loan crisis problems in the late 80s that we're seeing here. And I think for me, that doesn't spend a lot of my time in commercial real estate. This caught me. I mean, the utter value destruction really caught my eye here. What a mess.
Yeah, it really is. And I find myself looking at numbers like this, Mark, and saying, man, I wish I had the $5 million to go buy the office that was, purchased for 10 times that for $51 million in 2012 or something. As we were talking, the occupancy rates, are down. I mean, they're soft for sure in office space up there. I think that the data point that we had referenced was somewhere 27 to 30%, occupancy, which isn't, a 90% vacancy rate or something where you've got nobody in the spaces. But I think,
Jeff, just want to make sure we're clear that 30% vacancy, like roughly 29% vacancy, not occupancy. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes, I jumbling both of those together in my enthusiasm for the topic, Mark. So yes, it's not that's the point though. Is it not that nobody's in these office spaces? 30% vacant is not good, for sure. But in and of itself, I would not expect to lead to a 90% destruction in value or collapse of the price necessarily. But I think, as you pointed out in the kind of pre-show conversation, you couple that with interest rates that are 2 to 3 times higher than what they were in the zero interest rate, policies of COVID, which is when a lot of this stuff got refied. Interest rates weren't necessarily that low when these properties were initially purchased in 2016, 2012, 2014 era. But, the commercial financing tends to get reset every 3 to 5 years, depending on the loan structure. And so when you've got something that was refied or a loan that was restructured at very low interest rates, and now they're up in the 6, 7, 8% interest rate range, on commercial loans, that coupled with the lack of revenue to service than what's in higher debt, it just has a compounding effect, kind of like what you were talking about in the residential space. Any single data point or negative factor in isolation wouldn't lead to the massive destruction in value that we're seeing here in the office space. The residential side, it hasn't manifested in massive value destruction, but it has in overall transaction, volume destruction. And so interesting to see how it manifests differently in the different segments of the real estate market, but significant pain all the same.
Man, yeah. Going from 7 or 8% vacancy to 30%, really makes a difference in terms of the cash flow productivity of the building. And man, if we should have done this, I didn't do it for the podcast, but it's one thing to see the address in a 94% drop and the big numbers pre-purchase and post current purchase, but then to see these buildings, they're the actual images of the building. I mean, these are big, beautiful Chicago buildings, as they have tons of down there, trading for $4 million. My goodness. But Jeff, if you did have $4 million to go buy it, you got to hold it, and you got to cover that. So the holding costs are just a killer on this if it's not cash flowing. And yeah, I'm sure that they're significant. And it's cap rates that have gone from 4 or 5% to 7 to 8. It is it's behavioral changes. It is a work from home initiative that has had meaningful impact. Sure, a lot of it hasn't stuck, but enough has that it's a real difference. In Chicago specifically, I think you've got some downtown crime issues that might be chasing people out. So that's a little bit unique there. But I don't know. It's a lot has changed. And I think the real concern, first, isn't it interesting that you and I are covering this today, because we're surprised by the level of value destruction in the ERC days when the savings and loan crisis hit and there was tons of foreclosure that hit Texas particularly hard. And that I can only imagine that was in every business headline for years, talking about the value destruction and what was happening. It's hardly making news, like mainstream news, Jeff. This is not something that you and I see very much. And so it's almost, I don't know, it's strange how the national mind has absorbed this as not headline worthy, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, your response was kind of funny, Mark. You're like, I got to check to see if this is even real. Like, is this just some fake, like fake news post on, on X to try to get views or something? And as far as we can tell, I mean, it definitely seems to be actual prices and changes. Now, I think to your point, it's not necessarily at that level in all of the metros around the country. So there probably are some geographically specific issues. And I remember being at an Appraisal Institute meeting, and one of the staffers, talking about having been mugged, at gunpoint at one point, within the couple of years leading up to it. And so I think you do have some legitimate crime and other issues that are probably a complicating factor there. But I mean, destruction or price change at that level is massive and is wild. And, markets have a way of settling themselves out over time or whatever. But I think part of what was so interesting is that this isn't necessarily what's happening in office markets in other parts of the country and other cities. But even when you step back and look at other segments of the commercial space in other cities, it's almost an opposite story, which is kind of where we're coming up with the tale of two cities as far as that goes. Fortunately, the brighter news is a little bit more positive in your backyard, which is, I think, I hope, good news generally.
Yeah. And we're picking two extremes. We're picking an extreme in the office segment and Chicago. We're picking an extreme in a different class, which seems to be doing quite well, which is industrial, and then picking Houston, which is in Texas, that's had a lot of Fortune 500 headquarters move here. There's this real, the migration has continued, sort of started during COVID and maybe a little bit before, but as states are out there, well, at least some are battling to be the best business climate to attract headquarters and companies. Others are doing the exact opposite. They are, saying that big successful companies aren't paying enough, or their employees aren't paying enough, and so there are decisions, by corporate to leave, different states. So you've got this, this competing set of policy issues, but so Texas has been on the winning front of that because they've been very pro-business, and this has been like a governor tactic for a long time, from all the way back to like Rick Perry in the early 2000s, is just trying to woo businesses with this sort of stuff. But just a different post from Houstonomics. It's just talking about the manufacturing boom that is going on in Houston. And just a couple of listed deals is a 1 million square foot Eli Lilly pharmaceutical plant, Bristol Myers Squibb $1 billion pharmaceutical plant, Foxconn Nvidia $450 million AI supercomputer factory, Apple expanding a 500,000 square foot Mac Mini AI server manufacturing plant. Tesla is building their power grids here. And so I think there's a lot of dichotomies to see in this, Jeff, but one of them, I don't know, surprises me a little bit, I guess, in that we are now in the second or third inning of an AI boom. And I think like logic would tell me that we are going to see more office type space, maybe data centers. I guess we're seeing some of that, but manufacturing is a little bit at odds to what I would assume would be an AI boom. And so I would see in that world office doing a little bit better and industrial not doing quite as well. But the exact opposite is happening. And when you start to listen to a lot of the venture capital folks that you and I like to listen to in the tech space, it's a movement to atoms, ATOM, building things and using AI to help us build a lot, or to come up with new drugs that are helpful to others, and creating all sorts of other opportunities that are coming in the physical world. So it's just interesting to see those two things happening.
Boy, it sure is. And there is this kind of fundamental shift taking place where anything to support the build out of artificial intelligence, the data centers and power and everything that goes into it, there's a lot of demand. And we've talked, quite a bit about the demand for jobs in those spaces, electricians and plumbers and all of those that are helping with this, this massive build out and kind of distribution of labor in some sense, and some of that I think is related in some sense as well to the challenges with bringing on and building affordable housing, because you've got competing demands for the subcontractors that would otherwise be just building houses. I think the costs of material and the cost of labor have stayed higher for longer than they might have otherwise if it wasn't for the demand in these alternative uses. So we see that playing out, and not all commercial real estate is being impacted, in the same way. And as this kind of tale of two cities points out, it's not just the cities geographically, but it's the subset of real estate within them that are moving in kind of opposite directions for multiple and varying reasons. So it's interesting to see. And it's just the nature of markets. I mean, things change, and what is needed today isn't necessarily what was needed yesterday and won't necessarily be needed tomorrow. But it's so hard to call where are things going in the future, because to your point, Mark, sometimes the effect is the opposite of what you might expect. I did see an interesting counter data point in that Anthropic is looking to lease close to 500,000 square feet of space, office space in the Manhattan area. I was just asking Gemini, why they might be doing that. It really interesting. One of the cited reasons is potentially a hoarding of AI talent, and so it's this recruiting effort of how can I get the top AI engineers and programmers into the profession or into my company. Well, have the most appealing offer, not just in compensation, but in like work location and environment. Interesting to me that that's in New York and not Silicon Valley. But so we see maybe small little data points of the counter to what the office market is doing in Chicago. But again, for very specific and probably localized reasons, isn't happening across the board, or across the country in every city around the country or whatever. But boy, it's fascinating to try to keep track of, because the trends can change pretty quickly, and they can be very dramatically different from one area to the next.
Well, my last point on the industrial boom here in Houston and in many other places, right? It's just a symbol here, but is the federal government is intervening in the market quite a bit. And when they do that, they are picking winners and losers. We are onshoring or reshoring a lot of manufacturing. I think that's probably good with what we found, and even problems we ran into during COVID, where we didn't have the right PPE stuff to deal with it because we were bringing them all offshore and we didn't have much control over that. So great, we're onshoring that, but we'll be talking about some of the other executive orders. I mean, when you intervene, you are deciding winners and losers one way or another. And I think appraisers probably are mistakenly thinking, the president wants to revive the housing market. This is going to be great for us. I don't know. Not so fast. That it doesn't necessarily mean that. So we'll get that sorted out. But first, we have not talked a lot about appraisal topics here recently, but the president had starting to intervene in the appraiser industry, and then specifically around modernization, the number of appraisers, how appraisals get done. And the Appraisal Foundation has responded with a working paper that I thought was pretty interesting and really good, I think, at the end of the day, as I look at it. And Jeff, why don't you walk us through a few of the broader points of that paper?
Yeah, you bet. So I've seen this distributed kind of out in the public space at this point, Mark, through some of the industry councils that they have. And so, any of this stuff that we're sharing has been basically, shared publicly. And it's in response, like you said, to the executive order. There are a couple of interesting data points or takeaways that I think are worth highlighting. And I think, in the real estate economy and trying to get transactions done, everybody has an interest in having reliable appraisals done, having access to reliable appraisals that are done, in a timely way and are done effectively. And so when there's a potential disruption to that pipeline, I think there are some concerns. One of the interesting data points that was shared, and this is also public information, but when you look at the historic trends of appraiser or credentials, a couple of things emerge and stand out. On the screen, we're showing that starting in the early 90s, there had been, between 20 and 30,000 licensed appraisers. One of the things that happened, and as I understand it, was actually kind of an unintended consequence with initially HVCC, the Home Valuation Code of Conduct, that then was kind of sunset and replaced by Dodd-Frank Act. It was licensed appraisers, which is kind of the entry-level licensure, were excluded from doing FHA work for, being approved with HUD to do FHA, rural housing, USDA, type of loans. And there are some limitations on the overall transaction values that a licensed appraiser can participate in. And so what you've seen as a result of that is from the great financial crisis, the number of licensed appraisers really dropped off a cliff from 30,000 down to less than 10,000 licensed appraisers in the country today. Interesting that on the opposite end of that spectrum, certified general appraisers, the commercial appraisers in the space, according to the data, are actually as high as they ever have been historically, just over 40,000. One of the things that happens there is many commercial appraisers will have multiple state credentials or licenses. And so it's been one of the challenges in measuring that accurately is, how many are unique individuals versus a single individual that is licensed in 2 or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 states, depending on the nature of specialization that they have. But that number has generally increased over time and not seen the dip that both the licensed appraisers and the certified residential appraisers have seen coming out of the great financial crisis. The last data point is the certified residential appraisers peaked in the high 50,000 range and is down closer to 40,000 today over that same period coming out of the great financial crisis, 2008, 2009, to the present. And I think reflects the economic realities that you and I have been talking about for a long time, is that residential transactions are at historic lows. They have been, coming out of the COVID era. And I think we've seen the appraiser population, mirror that, especially if you're able to see the chart. Certified residential appraisers really took a big drop, in 2023 through about the present. That drop off has been pretty pronounced, and is just a reflection of the operating environment in the moment.
You bet. Yeah. The licensed residential thing is, so the foundation is suggesting addressing that issue. One, it's important to note that is the easiest license to get, right? Not to say it is easy, it is just easier relative to the other licenses. And so it's a great entry point for appraisers. And there has been a cascading effect when licensed appraisers are not able to do FHA work or appraisals for FHA loans, Jeff. There's a real problem there, and it cascades because a lender looks at, say, well, look, okay, I've got a conventional loan right now. It allows me to use a licensed appraiser, but there are times where a loan gets moved from conventional to FHA, and I would like the same appraiser because I kind of know what they think about the property. I need to convert that appraisal and convert the loan and then get an appraisal prepared for the FHA assignment. And I could no longer use that residential licensed appraiser, right? And so they just say, I'm not going to use the licensed appraiser at all. And so the fact that they can't do FHA essentially means that a lot of the conventional is off limits to them because a bank or a lender or an AMC or whoever has just decided it's not worth the risk in the small event that it might get converted to FHA. And so you have this license level out there that's nearly unusable, and if not, you can't do work associated with the firm, or some supervisor in a lot of cases in those ways. The lenders won't allow it. So you're really stuck with that license in many cases, just not being able to find a sustainable living doing it. And so it's been a real problem.
You bet. Yeah, it really has. And that's been what's led to that. So, in this paper, the foundation is highlighting the historic trends, and then they're in response to this executive order of increasing access to mortgage credit, saying, okay, well, here are some of the possible and proposed solutions that are out there. And, to your point, Mark, on making a living, one of the other data points that they talk about, which I think is worth highlighting here for a second, is the appraiser fees specifically. And I think it makes a lot of sense that you can address the appraiser population and access to appraisal services by, simply making sure that there's enough economic and financial incentive for appraisers to be hiring or bringing in new appraisers and for new entrants to be coming into the space. An interesting analysis that's cited here with data points and referenced is a typical residential appraisal fee in 2011 is reported by a survey through OREP industry fee survey at $400 in 2011. Fast forward to 2025, the estimated average residential appraisal fee is $425. That's only just over a 6% increase in that 14-year period of time. One of the interesting data points that they put forward is the inflation-adjusted fee from 2011 at $400 would equate to $575. And actually, I ran the quick math on that, Mark. That's a 44% increase over that amount of time. The side note is interesting that the value of the dollar decreases that much over that period of time. When you're adjusting for inflation, you can see why the Fed is targeting a low inflation rate over time, because it just has a lot of kind of adverse impacts. One of the things that stands out to me, and one of the other data points that there, or maybe not data points, but proposed solutions that's in the paper, is clear fee disclosure between what's actually being paid for the appraisal versus what's being paid for management, AMC fees, or something that's not going directly to the appraiser for the appraisal that's part of the transaction. And I don't know of any closing statements that are charging $500 or $600 or less to the appraiser. Most of that, for the overall appraisal, most of that is being charged more. Then there is a management component there. You may be interested in your perspective on on what that ought to be, but the reality is the consumer's paying more than the $575 in most cases, and yet the appraiser is not collecting the $575 or more that would be the equivalent of just the fee from 2011 keeping up with inflation through 2025.
It's complicated. I think, this appraisal fees not keeping up with inflation is one of the components that kind of translates to a Chicago office market level destructive environment for appraisers. I mean, there is way less appraisals out there to do. The appraisal fee has not kept up with the price or the increase in inflation. Groceries have kept up, just as an example. Gas has, buying a car has. And so all of these things, it's more expensive to live, but you're not getting much fee to help you in dealing with that, and you have less work out there to deal with. So it's just a nasty market, and we all know you have appraisal waivers, right? Those are out there. Those decrease the amount of appraisals that appraisers would be doing. You have a long moratorium on foreclosures, which I think has had as much of a drastic impact on appraisers over the last 4 or 5, 6 years as anything, because appraisers were generally in a pretty stable position no matter the interest rate cycle, because there was a lot of work for us to do in the sad response to high interest rates and drops in price. You have a lot of foreclosure work to do, and appraisers just haven't gotten that work. And in fact, there was moratoriums on foreclosures for a long time. Foreclosures seem to be increasing, but to what extent will that result in appraisal work? I'm not sure it's going to be a lot. So you've got a lot less demand for our services right now. And when we get that service, it's not kept up with inflation on any level. So it's a quagmire, and I think explains even further the problems we deal with that go beyond 40+ year historical lows in mortgage activity, despite having a lot more population in the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And an additional factor is a change in the appraisal reporting format, with this new UAD 3.6, where more information is being requested to be collected and potentially analyzed in the appraisal report. All of these things, I think, tell the same story, that you have to have an adequate financial incentive to keep appraisers in the profession, keep them from retiring or transitioning to a different profession, and to entice, the new generation in. It always surprises me, Mark. There are a lot of people that are interested in appraisal and real estate valuation. Many try the agent thing and realize, hey, I'm more drawn to the analysis. I want to be in real estate, but not necessarily, showing homes or trying to, to be the agent in the transaction. And it's just been financially difficult to bring people in, to become appraisers. But I think it's a healthy conversation. Nobody's saying, hey, the minimum fee has to be X or Y or whatever. But I think the reality that, in inflation adjusted terms, the fee that the appraiser is collecting has actually gone down over that amount of time relative to the value of the dollar. It just speaks to one of the reasons that it's hard to bring in and maintain, the overall population. So I think, shining a light on that reality is healthy, and necessary for it to make financial sense for an appraiser to continue or to come into the space. A couple of the other things that they are identifying as potential solutions, for maintaining the appraiser population, allowing it to expand as needed with demand. We're at these 30-year lows in mortgage transactions. Well, that's not going to last forever, and you're going to need enough appraisers to do the work when transactions do eventually pick back up. One of the data or areas of concern are rural loans and areas. The proposal is to increase the presence of licensed appraisers to service the rural areas, and by extension, especially the rural housing, USDA loans that are prevalent in those kinds of areas. Right now, licensed appraisers can't do those. Allowing them to, I think, would help. One of the other things I think that makes a lot of sense that we've seen be successful is not only allowing the licensed appraisers, but making sure that there's a space for trainees to be involved in, I think, in the appraisal process, wherever, but especially in rural areas. If you want to increase and replace the aging appraiser population that services rural areas, allowing trainees to be involved, including signing on the reports and inspecting properties on their own once they're qualified to do that. All of those sorts of things, I think, can help address, really where the underserved areas are in rural markets in particular. So I think one of the proposed solutions that definitely makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Trainees are a lifeblood. And in fact, the executive order, kind of surprising to me, but specifically talked about simplifying qualifications, making it easier to become an appraiser. And trainees are the existing pathway to make that happen. And we've talked about the override or the percentage of the overall fee that the AMC gets. It's meaningful. They've gotten what feels like a higher percentage of any increase that would be from the borrower, paying for the appraisal in the process. But AMCs serve a meaningful role in the industry one way or another, but there are some impacts from how they have decided to best run their business. And largely, Jeff, that is, I need to know which appraiser has done the assignments that they've done for me. And then from that analysis on how they performed, I need to decide exactly who is doing that next one, because I need to control it. I need to be able to deliver that back to the customer. I need to rely on it being delivered on time with quality, a responsive appraiser, those sorts of things. And over time, that a lot of that role, which right appraiser in that market should do this order, was handled by an appraisal firm with some geographic understanding and some ability to manage the ebbs and flows of their staff, of geographies, of new appraiser crops coming in, and making sure that we had appraisers available. And it seems to me that the way that AMCs have to operate their businesses is to kind of step in and do that. But in a lot of cases, they're saying, hey, look, I haven't really talked to my lender about whether or not they would allow a trainee to inspect or to do some things in this process. But it's kind of a hassle. I'm going to overlay a rule here that you cannot use trainees in the process. And that has really pervaded throughout. And so AMCs are kind of stepping in and saying, there's really not a pathway for a small firm or a large firm to bring trainees in. And so it's created a lot of problems over the years. And I don't know, the workforce paper is addressing a little bit of that one way or another. And I think it's really meaningful.
It really is. And there's 2 points that they're addressing it from there. One of those is identifying that, hey, trainee isn't the only way to get into the profession now, which it used to be, really the only option. I feel like it's important for an appraiser to have some practical experience. The foundation at its core wants to promote and it must promote the public's trust in the appraisal profession, in the appraisers that are out there doing the work. And it's really hard to learn how to be an effective, competent appraiser. We work with a lot, we do a lot of training and do the very best that we can to make sure that it's high quality work going out the door, but it takes time and it takes writing reports to get proficient and not make silly mistakes. They're identifying, the practicum, the PARIA pathways that you and I have touched on that eliminate the barrier of I got to find somebody willing to train me if I ever actually want to become an appraiser. I think those are good, pathways and options, to alternatives to bring people in. Firms like ours and others have hired trainees over the years. We continue to do that and train them and kind of proudly do so. And it's a heavy lift. It takes a lot of work and a lot of intention to do that. But they're identifying that, hey, finding a supervisor isn't the only way to make it into the profession today, even though that's maybe how it used to be in the past. One of the other things that they're pointing out, Mark, and you've touched on this a little bit, with the appraisal firm, is one of the suggestions is allow and promote an appraisal assignment to a firm and not just to an appraiser license specifically. And I think that firm is defined as, two appraisers working together up through, whatever a national firm constitution looks like and kind of everything in between. But anybody that's worked in that kind of an environment has had the situation where I have an order offered to an appraiser. That appraiser's either very busy, can't take it on, is out of town, is sick, for some reason isn't the best person to do that assignment. Maybe they just don't have work in that particular part of the city or county or whatever that they're covering, but they got somebody else desperate for work or much more available for whatever reason, and they can't just make the internal decision to give it to the person that's most available and best qualified, within that firm. And so I think this suggestion makes a lot of sense. I don't think that it, results in all of the work going away from the individual appraiser, by any means, but I think it helps smooth some of the hurdles of, getting orders placed with the best person to do that work, because who better than the firm that where the appraisers are working together can make the decision as to who's best available and best qualified to take on whatever the assignment is. So it was interesting to see that proposed as one of the suggestions, but I think can go hand in hand with making it easier to come in the first place, but then also get assignments to people that are most ready and able to take them on.
Yeah, I love the suggestion. I'm surprised that it's found its way into the workforce paper, but I certainly agree wholeheartedly with the sentiment. And it's how commercial world seems to work. It's how the accounting world works and other kind of similar professions. And it's how residential used to work before the prevalence of the AMC, which I think there is room for it. I think this is just one consequence that has not helped things on a number of fronts. So yeah, anything else you want to talk about as it relates to the workforce paper and where this appraisal world's going?
No, well, the only last minor bullet point is, one of the things they're promoting is, the wording I think was interesting and important. It said continued measured modernization of valuation products. I think there's an acknowledgement that appraisal modernization at some level involves a variety of scope of work for the appraisal. Some requires an inspection by the appraiser, some does not. Some's a hybrid where somebody's collecting data about the property if it's not the appraiser. They're suggesting a measured approach to that, which I think makes sense. But it's an effort to try to respond responsibly to the executive order in a way that I hope will result in there being a need and responsibly filled appraisals being done by well-qualified appraisers across the landscape, from those working on their own through those working with large companies and everywhere in between. So it's I thought was very thoughtfully put together and trying to responsibly address some of the concerns that were identified in the EO.
Jeff, I have two concluding thoughts. The first is that for all of the appraiser industry doomsday folks, maybe the foundation is biased. They don't exist if there aren't enough appraisers out there, I guess. But there is a projection of between 85 and 90,000 appraisers in total by 2030. That is a slight increase from what we have today. 2035. 80,000 to 100, I think is the guesstimate. A little bit less, but still a lot. That's a pretty marginal drop. And then by 2040, I think increasing all the same. I guess there isn't a specific number with it, but these projections would suggest that appraiser population is going to be pretty similar, right? And not drastically reduced from where we are. The second is, an overriding theme within the workforce paper about the efficiencies and productivity gains that appraisers have gotten and are expected to get moving forward. That is being able to do more analysis and more files, and that's a critical component of considering appraisal population, demand, and just appraisers' capabilities and what we'll be doing in the space. And this is something that you and I have built our company on, is a more productive appraiser, because it is fit for purpose in the industry. In my mind, it should be this way, because there are tools and ways to get about this. And this, when an appraiser's unique perspective, training, and mindset and judgment can be applied to more properties, the more useful we can be out in the marketplace. And this is right at the center of all of the artificial intelligence discussions that we're having. I've seen some say and kind of repurpose this for appraisal. That's, AI is not going to take your job. An appraiser using AI is going to take your job, and so I think it's just being up to date with these tools and being more productive, getting a competent, thorough, maybe even improved analysis done more quickly is the way forward. And it's what the industry expects of us, and it's what we should be doing.
I think it's well said. I think that's the story of many professions, as you look at it, medical, dental, even accounting and legal. Many, everyone I can think of has found ways and intentionally, escalated the professionalism of the ultimate professional by a lift from other resources, whether it's support teams, whether it's technology and data in this artificial intelligence space. The number of patients that a doctor sees, that a dentist sees, the number of files that a CPA can touch is higher today than it was 20, 30, 50 years ago. And in part, it's because it's applying the professional's judgment to, as many potential clients or customers as possible. And of course, always doing that in a responsible way makes sense. But the beauty of technology and artificial intelligence, I think, to your point, Mark, is that it can be an improved analysis, a more comprehensive approach that doesn't necessarily take more time. It takes less, but it takes intention around building the process that allows for that to happen every time. And as you do that, there's no reason that, the productivity can't go up along with the quality of the ultimate output. And I think that's where, appraiser and many professionals have been heading for a long time and will continue to head in this AI world.
Yeah, very good. Well, Jeff, the last bullet point that we had to discuss was a survey, an article kind of covering the results of this survey from Lance Lambert with Resi Club. Lots of good data coming out of him on housing in the United States, and interviewing institutional homeowners, operators, build to rent. I think it was kind of buy to rehab sort of situations on a large level, but a material cancellation or delay in single family home projects amounting to some 6,000 individual homes kind of put on pause or no longer plans to be completed here, just in the short time since this institutional operator housing ban has been put into effect. And on the screen here is one industry insider quote that says the unknown is the hardest part. If you don't know the rules of the game, what do? We have been involved in an enormous project that was canceled the second the president's executive order came out in late January, and so we've experienced this stuff firsthand for sure. And understandably, many are concluding the same thing. Like, look, I don't fully know where all this lands, but I can't. This is all policy and regulatory risk that is not worked into any deal I can put together. And so it's here, this uncertainty, the picks of winners and losers are all creating the problems that we've been talking about here that really are homeowners and home buyers, it's this uncertainty, just you can't act.
It makes it so hard. And the reason that this was put into place initially was they wanted to make housing available to first-time home buyers, to individual home buyers. The assumption was if we don't allow institutions to own and hold these for a long time, houses will be available for that contingent that we're trying to serve. Well, this is identifying that maybe they won't. These were homes that were going to be built that weren't actually built. And so it's not transitioning, inventory to the contingent that they wanted to. And I think it's one of the problems with the intervention is you assume that something's going to happen, the homes being built in this case. And when those aren't built, nobody's better off. And then you have institutions that otherwise would have built and had a business model around that now just are pausing. They're not building and selling to individuals. And so it's just another example of why it's hard and not always prudent to over-regulate, in the markets, because what you think they're going to do isn't necessarily what they end up doing.
Amen to that. So it is a wild, uncertain world out there. This makes for interesting times, Jeff, and we are two interesting guys trying to sort through it. So I enjoyed episode 91 here. We are pushing closely to 100. Yeah, it's been fun. Let's keep going.
We'll keep going. I think we've told ourselves internally, we're at least going to get 100 episodes out and then see, what happens and where we're at. And it's been a lot of fun, Mark. I enjoy getting together and trying to figure out and understand this world that we live in. And so we'll continue to bring you what's happening and then our take on it.
All right. Till next time, Jeff.
Thanks, Mark.